اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. اللهم بارك على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما باركت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Abu Amrah al-Ansari radiallahu ta'ala anhu narrates that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "The believing servant who testifies that there is none worthy of worship except Allah and that I am the messenger of Allah, then it will most certainly barricade him from the hellfire." On the day of resurrection, another narration states, no person meets Allah Jalla Jalaluhu on the day of resurrection with this testimony without being admitted into paradise, irrespective of how many sins they may be in his book of deeds. Mentioned by Ahmed Tabarani. Note, in the light of this and other similar Ahadeeth, the commentators state that the person who presents himself in the court of Allah Jalla Jalaluhu with this testimony of believing in the oneness of Allah Jalla Jalaluhu and the Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam is the messenger of Allah Jalla Jalaluhu, while also having committed evils, Allah Jalla Jalaluhu will still admit him into paradise. He will either completely pardon him from his sins and admit him into paradise, or admit him after having punished him. Itban ibn Malik radiallahu ta'ala anhu narrates that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "It cannot happen that a person testifies that there is none worthy of worship except Allah, and that I am the messenger of Allah, and he still enters the hellfire, or that it devours him." Mentioned by Muslim. Abu Qatada radiallahu ta'ala anhu narrates from his father that the messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Whoever testifies that there is none worthy of worship except Allah, and that Muhammad is the messenger of Allah, and his tongue becomes subdued by this testimony, and his heart experiences tranquility through it due to constant repetition of this kalima, the hellfire will not devour him." Mentioned by Bayhaqi. Muaz ibn Jabal radiallahu ta'ala anhu narrates that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Any person who passes away while testifying with full conviction that there is none worthy of worship except Allah Jalla Jalaluhu, and that I am the messenger of Allah, then Allah Jalla Jalaluhu will most certainly forgive him." Mentioned by Ahmed. Anas ibn Malik radiallahu ta'ala anhu narrates, one day Muaz radiallahu ta'ala anhu was sitting behind the messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam on the same saddle when the latter said to him, "O Muaz ibn Jabal," he replied, "O messenger of Allah, I am here and I am fortunate to be with you." He said, "O Muaz," he replied, "O messenger of Allah, I am here and I am fortunate to be with you." He said this 3 times. He then said, "Whoever testifies with all his heart that there is none worthy of worship except Allah, and that Muhammad is the messenger of Allah, then Allah Jalla Jalaluhu most certainly makes the hellfire unlawful to him." He said, "O messenger of Allah, should I not convey this to the people so that they may rejoice?" He replied, "If we convey this to them, they will place their reliance on it. In other words, they will abandon doing good deeds." Anas radiallahu ta'ala anhu said, Muaz radiallahu ta'ala anhu narrated this hadith at the time of his death for fear of bearing the sin of concealing a hadith. Mentioned by Bukhari. Note, the hadith which state the hellfire becomes unlawful to a person for merely attesting to the oneness of Allah Jalla Jalaluhu and the messengership of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam are explained in 2 ways by the commentators. One is that it refers to salvation from the eternal punishment of the hellfire. In other words, unlike the unbelievers and polytheists, the believers will not be left over in the hellfire. They will be cast into hell for a limited time as punishment for their sins. The other explanation is that the testimony of the oneness of Allah Jalla Jalaluhu and the messengership of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam entails the religion of Islam in its entirety. Whoever gives this testimony with sincerity and full comprehension, his life will be totally in accordance with Islam. Abu Hurairah radiallahu ta'ala anhu narrates that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "The person who will be most fortunate to get my intercession on the day of resurrection will be the person who said, La ilaha illallah with sincerity of his heart. Mentioned by Bukhari. Rifa' al-Juhanni radiyallahu ta'ala anhu narrates that the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, I give testimony before Allah Jalla Jalaluhu that the person who dies while testifying with all his heart that there is none worthy of worship except Allah, I am the messenger of Allah, and then remains on good deeds, then he will certainly enter paradise. Mentioned by Ahmad. Umar ibn al-Khattab radiyallahu ta'ala anhu narrates, I heard the messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wasallam saying, I know a statement which if a person says while considering it to be true with his heart and passes away in that state, Allah Jalla Jalaluhu will most certainly make him unlawful to the hellfire. It is La ilaha illallah. Iyad al-Ansari radiyallahu ta'ala anhu narrates, La ilaha illallah is a statement which is honorable in the sight of Allah. It holds a high position with Him. Whoever says it with a sincere heart, Allah Jalla Jalaluhu shall admit him thereby into paradise. Whoever says it by the way of deceit, it may safeguard his life and wealth in this world, but tomorrow in the hereafter he will meet Allah Jalla Jalaluhu in such a state that he will interrogate him. Mentioned by Bazzar. Note: the person who says this kalima deceitfully with safeguard his life and wealth because he will be a Muslim, outwardly jihad will not be waged against him as it would against other unbelievers, nor will his wealth be taken. Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiyallahu ta'ala anhu narrates that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, he who testifies that there is none worthy of worship except Allah Jalla Jalaluhu in such a way that his heart testifies to what his tongue uttered may enter from any of the doors of paradise. Mentioned by Abu Ya'la. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the tawfiq to make amal upon whatever we have listened to, and may He give us the tawfiq to send this to others, inshallah. Subhanallah bihamdihi, subhanakallahumma bihamdika, nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayh.